Once existed a time when sleep was not simply a means of rest, but a path to healing. A time when dreams were seen not as illusions, but as messages, whispers from the divine, clues to what ailed the body or the soul. You are about to journey into the hushed corridors of ancient Greece, to a place where the sick and the weary were guided into sleep not with medicine, but with ritual. A place where healing came not from potions, but from visions. These were the sleep temples, sacred spaces devoted to dream healing. In the stillness of candlelit chambers, people once lay down to sleep in hopes of seeing a god. Not metaphorically, but truly, in their dreams. And when they awoke, they believed they were changed. Tonight, we will walk the paths of these ancient sanctuaries. We will meet the healers and the pilgrims, listen to the quiet rituals of purification and prayer, and step gently into a forgotten world, where medicine and mysticism intertwined beneath the stars. So let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts slow down. You are safe here. And now, we begin. To understand the sleep temples of ancient Greece, we must first understand the world that built them. A world where the divine was not distant or abstract, but vividly present. In this world, health was more than physical. Aches of the body were often seen as reflections of disharmony in the soul, or a disruption in the balance between human and divine. The people of ancient Greece lived with gods all around them, not merely in sculpture or myth, but in every part of life: the home, the harvest, the wind, the stars, and above all, in the mysteries of sickness and health. If someone became ill, it wasn't just a matter of infection or injury. It might mean that something had gone wrong between the human and the divine, that the gods were sending a message, or that the sufferer had wandered too far from spiritual alignment. And so, healing was never only about herbs or ointments. It was also about listening, interpreting, restoring the connection between self and the sacred. In the center of this healing worldview stood a powerful figure, Asclepius, the god of medicine. According to legend, Asclepius was the son of Apollo, god of prophecy and light. He was taught the art of healing by Chiron, the wise centaur. Some said he was so skilled he could even bring the dead back to life. Asclepius was no distant deity. He was deeply loved, not feared, but revered. Temples were built in his name throughout Greece, called Asclepia. They became places where the sick could go not just for treatment, but for transformation. These were not chaotic hospitals. They were quiet sanctuaries, surrounded by nature, olive groves, flowing springs, the sound of birds and rustling leaves. Healing began the moment one arrived. Within these temples, the most sacred ritual was called, or incubation. Here's how it worked. A person would travel to the temple, often from great distances. Before being allowed to enter the sacred sleeping chamber, they would first go through a series of rituals: purification baths in cold spring water, offerings to the gods, and days of fasting or prayer. There was no rush. Time moved differently in these sanctuaries. A patient might spend several days simply preparing, walking the temple grounds, listening to priests recite hymns to Asclepius, reflecting on what had brought them there. And then, when the time was right, they would be guided into a darkened hall, the abaton, a sacred dormitory. There, on a stone bench or a straw mat, the sleeper would lie down under the soft flicker of oil lamps. Quiet would settle over the space, and the dream would begin. The goal was simple: to fall asleep, to dream, and in that dream, to encounter the god. Sometimes Asclepius would appear directly, a tall figure dressed in white, bearing a serpent-entwined staff. Other times he would send symbols, animals, or words that only the dreamer could understand. And sometimes the dream would not be remembered at all, but the healing would still come. In the morning, the sleeper would rise and share their vision with the temple priests. These priests, trained in the interpretation of dreams, would listen carefully and offer guidance, sometimes prescribing herbs, a new behavior, or a ritual act to continue the healing process. But many believed the dream itself was the cure, that something had been touched, adjusted, soothed in the night, and that the god had done his work. Throughout the ancient world, there are records of such dreams, carved into stone plaques, left as offerings by those who believed they had been healed. One inscription reads, "I came here blind, but the god touched my eyes in the dream, and I awoke, seeing." Another, more mysterious, "In the dream, a serpent licked the wound on my leg. I felt warmth. When I awoke, the pain was gone." To modern ears, these stories may sound like myth, but for the ancient Greeks, they were medicine, and the temples of sleep were their hospitals. We will continue, soon, with more of what took place inside these sacred spaces. But for now, allow your mind to rest within the hush of marble columns, the glow of golden lamps, and the deep, ancient belief that in the stillness of sleep, something holy can enter, and healing can begin. Let us return now to the quiet halls of the Asclepius, where sacred sleep awaited the weary. These temples were unlike anything we would recognize as medical today. There were no bustling corridors or shelves of instruments. Instead, there were courtyards open to the sky, sanctuaries shaded by olive trees, and inner sanctums where silence reigned. The architecture of healing was spiritual, sensory, and slow. Upon entering, a pilgrim would first stop at the catagogion, a guest house where they could rest and reflect before beginning their sacred journey. This was often followed by ritual purification, a cleansing bath in cool spring water, sometimes in silence, sometimes accompanied by a prayer to Asclepius or to Hygeia, his daughter, the goddess of cleanliness and health. Purity was essential, not just of the body, but of the spirit. The temple was a sacred vessel, and before sleep could be invited in, the outer world had to be gently released. Some patients fasted, others abstained from wine. All were encouraged to reflect inwardly, to let go of distractions, bitterness, fear. Then came the offering, a small token of devotion. This might be a coin, a piece of bread, a carved figure, or a lock of hair, something symbolic of what the pilgrim was ready to surrender in order to be made whole. Only then could they approach the abaton, the inner chamber of sleep. Inside the abaton, the atmosphere shifted. It was quiet, dimly lit by lamps. Stone benches lined the walls, and the scent of sacred herbs, perhaps frankincense or laurel, drifted through the air. Patients lay down alone, though surrounded by others. Some drifted off quickly. Others lingered in thought, whispering a final prayer to the god. And then, the waiting began. The temple priests did not orchestrate the dreams. They simply held the space. It was believed that if the sleeper was ready, the god would come. Sometimes, Asclepius arrived in human form. Sometimes as a serpent, his sacred animal, said to represent rejuvenation and rebirth. Other times, a dream might be symbolic, a journey through a forest, the appearance of a long-lost loved one, or a cryptic riddle. Each dream was considered unique to the dreamer. There was no one-size-fits-all interpretation. In the morning, the patient would rise and report their vision to a priest or healer, known as a therapeut, a servant of the god. The priest listened, carefully, not as a scientist, but as an interpreter, someone trained not in logic, but in myth. They might see in a dream an invitation to face a fear, to change a pattern, to make peace with someone, or to begin a new chapter of life. Other times, they would prescribe physical actions, a particular herb, a ritual to perform, a change in diet or environment, but the power of the dream itself remained central. For many, healing was not always dramatic. It was not a miracle, but a process, begun in sleep and continued through waking effort. Still, some left the temples proclaiming full recovery. There are records of the blind gaining sight, of the lame walking again, of women said to be infertile conceiving children after a single dream visitation. We do not know how much of this was faith, and how much, perhaps, the mysterious workings of the human mind, which even today, modern medicine cannot fully explain. But what we do know is this: the people believed. And belief is a powerful medicine. Now, let us return, not just to the temple itself, but to the hearts and minds of those who lay down inside it. The dreamers. Their voices, though ancient, still echo through the soft corridors of time. Many of their dreams were carved into stone, quite literally. At the temple of Epidaurus, one of the most famous Asclepius, there stood great slabs called iamata, inscribed with testimonies from those who had come seeking healing, and left with stories they believed were touched by the divine. One such account tells of a man named Hermodikos of Lampsakos. He had suffered from paralysis of the hands. Doctors in his hometown could do nothing. He came to the temple, offered prayers, purified himself, and entered the abaton. That night, he dreamed that the god Asclepius stood beside him, gently lifted his arms, and whispered something he could not remember upon waking. But when morning came, Hermodikos found he could move his hands. He left a carving in thanks and in wonder. Another tale comes from a woman named Isidora, who suffered from a mysterious pain in her belly that no one could explain. In her dream, she saw a serpent coiling around her waist, pressing gently, then slipping away. She awoke, frightened, but the pain was gone. Others dreamed of the god performing surgeries in symbolic ways. One man reported dreaming that Asclepius sliced open his stomach, removed something dark and writhing, then closed him up with golden thread. He claimed to feel entirely renewed. Of course, some dreams were less clear. One woman dreamed of a tree growing through her chest, its roots tangled around her ribs, its branches bearing fruit. The priest interpreted this as a sign of new life and encouraged her to try conceiving again. Months later, she became pregnant. What is striking in all these stories is not only the vividness of the dreams, but the deep emotional transformation they often triggered. Whether or not physical healing took place, something within these dreamers changed. In modern terms, we might say they experienced a kind of breakthrough, an inner shift in belief, in stress, in emotional blockage. The act of dreaming was not merely passive. It was a sacred dialogue between self, spirit, and symbol. To the Greeks, dreams held real power, not only to reveal, but to restore. These stories, passed down over centuries, remind us that healing was once seen as a holistic act, not merely of fixing the body, but listening to what the soul was trying to say. And in the silent hours of sleep, many found the voice they had been waiting for. As we move through the long halls of time, a question inevitably arises. If the sleep temples were so cherished, so seemingly effective, what happened to them? Why did they vanish from history? The answer, as with so much in the ancient world, is complex and layered. First came the slow shift in medical philosophy. In the classical period, a new school of thought began to rise, one rooted in logic, observation, and the body as a system. This was the era of Hippocrates, who, though deeply spiritual himself, emphasized natural causes over divine ones. Illness, he argued, came not from the gods, but from imbalances in the body's humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Dreams were still considered important, but no longer as direct channels to divine healing. Over time, temples of sleep were seen as mystical, and slowly less medical. Then came political change. As Rome rose and Greece fell under its influence, religious practices across the region shifted. The Roman Empire tolerated many beliefs, but centralized power demanded uniformity. Temples once sacred to Asclepius were repurposed. Some turned into civic buildings, others left to crumble. But the most decisive blow came in the Christianization of the Roman world. As Christianity spread, healing through dreams was increasingly viewed as pagan, a practice tied to false gods and suspect rituals. Many Asclepia were destroyed or shut down. Some were rebranded, their sacred symbols erased or overwritten. The serpent, once a sign of healing, became a symbol of temptation and sin. The gods of dreams were exiled from medicine, and sleep became ordinary again. Yet not everything vanished. Echoes of the dream temples lingered. Monastic centers in the early Christian world still practiced ritual healing. Pilgrims continued to sleep beside saints' relics, hoping for dreams of divine guidance. Even today, the caduceus, a symbol often linked to Asclepius and his serpent staff, remains on hospitals and ambulances around the world. The dream may have faded, but the memory remained. In the end, what was lost was not just a practice, but a worldview, one that saw sleep not as escape, but as revelation. A time when the night was not just for rest, but for renewal. And though the temples are gone, the dream, perhaps, still waits within us. And so, as the candlelight of ancient memory flickers low, we leave behind the marble columns and winding paths of the Asclepian temples. Their stones now lie quiet beneath wild grass and weathered time, but their echoes still hum softly, just beneath the surface. We have walked with the dreamers. We have heard their whispered prayers, their fears, their moments of wonder. We have traced the path from sacred sleep to healing, from visions in the dark to awakenings in the light. Though the world has changed, the mysteries of rest, of dreams, and of healing still stir gently within us. Tonight, as you drift deeper into your own quiet temple, remember that the ancient ones believed your dreams mattered, that they carried meaning, that healing was not only a matter of medicine, but of the spirit, of story, of sleep itself. Thank you for joining us here at Histories Untold, where the forgotten past breathes again, softly, slowly, like waves on ancient stone. Sleep well, dream deeply, and may healing find you in the quiet.